Hello, everyone. My name is James DeWade, and today I wanted to share some tips and tricks for developing useful and visually pleasing KPI or key performance indicator dashboards using Power Pivot and Power Query. I think there's some misconceptions about some of the limitations that Excel has in Power Query and Power Pivot. And I think that using some of these tools will help you in your day job or just overall be able to create some really interesting data models and dashboards that you may not have been aware that you could actually create. So today I'm going to use a example of fantasy football, but please note that you could use data within your organization or separate data tables that you may have. I'm going to be querying data from ESPN to bring this information in just to use as an interesting example to have some data to play around with. But if you have a big company and you're looking for information on dashboarding with either a revenue or key sales information within different units, know that you can apply what I'm showing you today with fantasy football to other applications within your organization. So I'll jump into that in just a little bit. And before I even do that, let me show you what this could look like. So if what I wanted to do today was take information from the ESPN website on rushing data, receiving data, and passing data, and bring that into Excel using Power Query, which can then be refreshed within the Excel application. I don't even need to open up ESPN. And then do a calculation within Excel as to how many fantasy points each of these players is receiving. And then roll all that information up to each NFL division. So this might be similar to how you have little units within your organization, and each of those units might do sales within a given region. So you can kind of think about like how this would apply to various situations. Today, I'm just doing this for fun because I thought it would be kind of interesting. And a lot of people are familiar with fantasy football. So what I was able to do was bring in data from ESPN website into various data tables using Power Query, and then use those data tables and apply them into a data model using Power Pivot, like you see here. Join them on a single variable, which is a concatenated player team variable, and then give each player their team and division within a separate data table, and then pivot those together to create various KPI dashboards that look at fantasy points by division. And you can look at it by QB, by rushing, by receiving, or just total fantasy points altogether. And notice here that I have these various data slicers, which is a kind of a neat user interface tool that you can then drill down into a particular region. Like I want to look at the AFC East. You can see that it gives me the AFC East here, but if I hit this little expand button, it'll then break it down by the teams within the AFC East. So I've got the Bills, the Dolphins, the Jets, and the Patriots. And then I can kind of collapse it again and hit my data slicer pivot, and it brings it back. And so this is all dynamically updated. And as the season goes on, I can then update my queries by hitting the refresh data button, and all of my information within Excel is updated automatically. I don't have to do anything else. It's kind of, you just put in all the effort up front and you're able to reap those rewards later on after you've done that. You can also build out a really interesting kind of single pivot table chart, as well as a pivot table up top. and use slicers here as well. And so you can do a single chart instead of maybe 4 separate charts. So that is what you can do, and it might be kind of interesting. But before I get into the details on that, the question is, why would you even want to do that? What is a KPI dashboard? Well, a KPI dashboard is a key performance indicator that aggregates important data from across an organization into a single location so that senior business officials within that institution have enough information to make decisions on strategy. And so oftentimes this is really difficult within an organization, and they don't have a KPI dashboard because data can be siloed off in several different locations or tables, and you're unable to bring it together in a meaningful way. It might be hard to get, so people may not be collecting the data in the same manner, so you're not comparing apples to apples. It might be hard to combine because there's no unique identifier like an employee ID or a unit ID that you can use to help join tables together and kind of help the data speak to one another. Data may need to be cleaned. And so this is really an important aspect of kind of data maintenance. And I can show you an example of that where the data that I'm getting from ESPN gives me the player's name and then the team concatenated right on top of the name without a single space. So in this instance, I had to clean that by using an extraction technique saying, give me the right 3 variables, or give me the right 3 characters for this individual, which then gives me RLV, but that's not the team name. Over here, then I have to kind of clean it because there's only certain teams within the NFL that have 2 character team names, like Las Vegas or Tampa Bay, as opposed to a 3 character name. And so I've done a nested if statement where I'm basically looking for certain values that I know will automatically have 2 characters instead of 3, like Las Vegas, Tampa Bay, New England, Kansas City, San Francisco, Green Bay, or New Orleans. If those aren't present, then I'm returning the right 3 characters. And so this is just an example of how you might have to clean data to help it kind of sing and speak to one another. This probably happens a lot within an organization. It can be really annoying, but if you set up these data tables and queries together, you can kind of put in all that effort up front and then not have to worry about that later on. So another reason that this might be difficult is that you may have these data tables that are in separate silos, but they don't come together. And so Power Query is a tool within Excel that gives you the ability to scrape data from a website or a server, assuming you have the appropriate access and security to do so, and then bring it into Excel in a data table like this. And so, like I showed you, I had that ESPN data table, and ESPN breaks their data tables up by quarterback data, and then quarterback names and teams. And they do this for running backs and receivers as well. And so I have 6 different data tables that I'm bringing in, which you can see over here. And I can refresh that information whenever I want, as long as I have an internet connection. And every time I do that, this information is automatically updated. One limitation here is that ESPN is only giving me the top 50 quarterbacks, or the top 50 receivers, or the top 50 running backs. But in reality, you probably have a data set that will have all of the information, hopefully. And then once you're able to bring that information in, you can combine it in Excel because Excel is so malleable. You can do so many different things. It's very fluid. So my data here, I'm combining both QB tables by showing you this table here. This is my Power Query for quarterback data from ESPN. And then these gray columns over here is basically saying, okay, go to the quarterback names and teams table, return the cell in A2. And then all these gray columns are basically information from the other table that's coming in here. Then I have a calculation where I'm calculating the fantasy points off of information within the table. And the great thing about Power Query or tables in general in Excel is that if you delete out rows or you refresh data, the formulas hold. So the formulas aren't deleted out every time you're refreshing the information or you're deleting rows within the table. The formulas are still going to be there. So that means that I can rely on this every time I refresh the data. Like if I'm looking at this weekly, I can refresh this information and know that my formulas are there. And so I've done the same thing with rushing data. You can see I'm bringing in the rushing players' names and the team value, as well as the division and their total fantasy points. And the same thing for receivers as well. So that's Power Query. And like I said, you can refresh this information automatically whenever you want. And so you could do it daily, weekly, monthly, whatever cadence you think would be appropriate for your file and for the managers that you might be presenting this information to. So the next up is Power Pivot. And Power Pivot, along with Power Query, these are add-ins that as long as you have a recent version of Excel, you should be able to go to the add-in section under File. And I'll probably drop a link to how you can add these Power Query and Power Pivot to your Excel if you don't already have it. But Power Pivot is a really powerful tool within Excel that I think is underappreciated. Power Pivot allows you to automatically bring in a table like the Power Query tables that you have into a data model. And so you just click on, once you have the Power Pivot ribbon, you just add the table to the data model, which I've already done. And once you've done that, then it's going to give you either a data view or a diagram view. The data view will show you what is in the data table. And again, every time you update your Power Query, your data model and the information within Power Pivot will automatically update as well. So I like looking at it through a diagram view. I'm kind of visual as opposed to the data view, but the data view is helpful in case you have questions about the underlying data. But within the diagram view, you are able to join your various tables together on a common variable. And so the common variable has to be something that is unique to an individual or a team, or that can help the data kind of talk to one another so that you can combine information together within the various tables in that model. And so the unique point that I did was, okay, we've got a player that has a player name along with their team concatenated at the end. And so we have a unique list of players and names, and players and teams rather, which I have over here. And so in addition to the player's name, I have their clean team value. I have their team name, which I'm looking up off of a separate table that I created here just for the purposes of this presentation, which looks at the team name, the team city, and then also the division over here. So using a quick VLOOKUP, you can basically bring in additional information to this table, like name, location, division. And once I have that information in here, then I can say, okay, the receiving table is going to be joined by player name over here. The rushing table is going to be joined by player name and team over here. And the quarterback table is going to be joined by player name and player team. And then I'm able to create, just like in any pivot table, you can create a calculated field that says, okay, I've got a fantasy point total over here. That's quarterback fantasy points. I've got a rushing fantasy total in my data table over here. I've got a receiving fantasy total. I can create a new value, a new calculated field called total fantasy points, and bring that in over here. And so it allows you to create multiple calculations that may not exist in any of the other tables, and create a new value, which can be really a powerful tool. Once you've done that and you've created the data table and the data model, then you're able to insert a pivot table into your Excel file. And you can either do a pivot table or a pivot chart or a chart and table. You can really just play around with it. What I did in the Excel file is I actually created 4 separate pivot tables from this data model into the division KPI dashboard. And again, once you do this, or rather, this is just an example of what you can do in Excel using fantasy data. But if you're at a company that has a number of different units and you want to look at sales data across those units, and you might want to look at it by quarter or by year, you can really see where this could be applied, hopefully. Again, this is just an example. I just want to get people's thinking about what applications are available, or what kind of examples you can come up with in your own life and work where you can use Power Query and Power Pivot. And so again, once you bring this information in, then you can kind of create some other user interface tools on top of that. So one would be these data slicers. So if you're looking at, say, a Power Pivot chart, you can go to the Pivot Chart Analyze tool, and then you can insert a slicer. If you had data that was on looking at different time variables, like a quarter, you could insert a timeline variable, which is kind of like a slicer, but for time periods. And then once you have that slicer in there, you can then kind of dynamically filter within the table. And again, all this information, once you set it up, all you have to do is refresh your data source, and it's going to bring in live data. So all of the effort is upfront, and then you really don't have to do a lot of maintenance thereafter. And so, like I said, you can dynamically filter to, say, AFC East, and then you can expand your field and you can see, okay, the Bills have 171 total fantasy points, and they're in the lead in this division versus the Patriots or the Jets or the Dolphins. And then you can unfilter that and then roll it all up. So that's one way of kind of using Power Query and Power Pivot to create some interesting charts and tools within Excel. The next time around, I'm going to do a second presentation on how do I use formulas within Excel, as well as developer tools, which you hopefully have all used developer tools before. And if you haven't, I'm going to go over some of the developer tools that you can utilize to really make a dashboard pop. And I'm going to use the same information that I've been using with this presentation. So I'll use the same fantasy football information, and I'll show you how you can set up a dashboard with formulas and developer tools that is equally as good as what I just showed you, if not better, and more dynamic. And so hopefully you've enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, please list them on the YouTube video below. And if you have any kind of suggestions for a future Excel video, let me know. I'm going to try to do these periodically, as I'm an Excel super fan and I really like challenging myself with creating different models and tools in Excel. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and hopefully I will interact with you in the comments below.